Hey there. Today I'm going to talk about Odin from Norse mythology. In a previous video where I talked about Thor, I mentioned a story called the Lay of Harbard, where there's an argument between Odin, who disguised as Harbard, a ferryman, and Thor. And in that story, you could see how the two characters of the gods come out. One of the things I neglected to mention in the Thor on the video on Thor was Thor was very much loved by common people. He wouldn't think it beneath him to sit down and have a meal with peasants, Whereas this Odin was he was a little bit more of a snob. He wasn't concerned with thralls or peasants. A thrall, by the way, was a type of servant or slave in Scandinavian society. It's where we get the terms today, like being enthralled. But Odin was more concerned with kings and royalty and kind of making them fight with each other because whereas Thor was more concerned with keeping the forces of evil at bay and everybody loved him because he kept us all safe. Odin was feared. He actually liked war because when you have war, you got people fighting, and when you got people fighting, you got deeds of valor, and when you got deeds of valor in the battlefield, he can send down his Valkyries, and he chooses which one of them to bring up to his hall, Valhalla, and therefore he has this hall up in Asgard, in heaven, where the gods live, and he's got this hall, Valhalla, where only the bravest of the brave live there, and after they're dead, and all they do is fight and feast, and that's all they do. And why does he do this? Well, he wants the best fighting men available because he knows that at Ragnarok, the end of the world, he's going to lead these brave dead souls to fight his enemies, and before the ending of the world happens. That's why he was. That's part of the reason, I guess, why he was so concerned with warfare. With warfare, you have great heroes, and Odin was in charge of these women called Valkyries, and their name means choosers of the slain, but really it's Odin that chooses who dies in battle, which is why Odin also had a reputation for being fickle. I mean, on the one hand, he would give victory to certain heroes, but then he would take their victory away and let them be slain. That was part of the job of the Valkyries, make sure they die. And why he did this? Well, Odin knew about fortune, and sometimes fortune is with you and sometimes it isn't. And fortune's going to turn against him one day when he meets his mortal enemy, the Fenris wolf, at Ragnarok. And so forth. So Odin's name is interesting. Usually in English it's Odin, but and this is really splitting hairs now in terms of how to pronounce his name. I mean, most people simply call him Odin, but actually, if you look at Old Norse, sometimes a symbol is used for the D, and it's not a D. It's the symbol for the sound, the voice th. And in Iceland, they actually pronounce his name a little closer to the way it was pronounced in a long time ago. It's more Odin, which is why in some English versions, he's sometimes spelled Othin rather than Odin, with the th being not Othin but Odin. Or Odin. Of course, his name is also known as Woden, Wodens, from in English-speaking areas, and it's where we get the word Wednesday from. Thor, we get Thursday from, and also he's in Germany, he's known as Wotan. Which is why in Wagner's Ring of the Nibelungs, he's referred to as a Wotan rather than Odin, because he was using the more German way of saying his name. I have a little statue of Odin here, actually. I got this from Scandinavia when I visited many years ago. You could see he's known for having only one eye. These are his two ravens, He's holding a sword here, but usually he's associated with a spear, a special spear that never misses its mark. And the spear is called Gungnir. His ravens are called Huginn and Munnin, which mean thought and memory. Because what happens is that it's believed that Odin was a bit of a shaman in many ways. He was concerned, a shaman is a person who goes into a trance and he sends his soul out to commune with spirits to gain knowledge. And his ravens leave and they search the world to gain knowledge, and they go back to Odin and they whisper in his ear what they found out that day. So it's Huginn and Munnin. He lost his eye because he was always in quest of knowledge. When he wasn't hanging out in Valhalla or causing strife among kings or whatever, or looking over battlefields, who to give his favor to, he would be very concerned with going around gathering as much knowledge as he can. And one way he got knowledge was there was a well called Mimir's well, and he wanted a drink from it that gives you special knowledge. And the guardian of the well, Mimir, said, "Well, you got to sacrifice an eye." So Odin said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Pulled out his eye, threw it in the well, and drank from it because he doesn't care about losing one eye if it gets some special knowledge. Ooh. Okay. He's also associated with two wolves called Geri and Freki. He had an 8-legged steed by the name of Sleipneir. That's an interesting story. That has to do with the building of Asgard's wall. I'm not going to go too much into detail on that story. Let's just say that in that story, there was a fabulous horse, and Loki lured the horse away, and Loki changed himself into a mare. And so not only was Loki able to change shape into a horse, he was able to change his sex as well, mated with the horse, and gave birth to the 8-legged steed Sleipnir. So as I said, he's Odin. Odin has other names. He's the god of war. He's the god of host or lord of host. He's sometimes called Allfather. He is, and when he's not usually pictured in war gear, he's pictured as a traveler. He usually wears a broad-brimmed hat with his one eye. He's got a cloak. He walks around with a staff, and he goes around and disguised like this. And he, again, looks at what the world is up to without knowing who he is. He's actually up in Asgard. He actually has a special hall which has this amazing tower, and this tower is so high. It's called Hlidskialf, and I think that's how you pronounce it. And up on that hall, it's so high, this tower, that he could survey the 9 worlds. 9 is a very important number to Norse mythology. It's believed that there were 9 worlds, and Midgard is one, Asgard's another, and Svartalfheim is another, Niflheim is another, and he surveys all the 9 worlds to see what's going on because he wants to know everything. Let's see. He even almost lost his head in a contest with a giant by the name of Vafthrudnir. And Vafthrudnir, he wanted to gain special knowledge from this giant, but they had a headbetting game. The first one who can't answer a question loses his head, and Vafthrudnir is the one that lost his head because Odin asked him a question he couldn't answer, so he lost his head. But Odin almost lost his, but he figured, hey, if it's for the sake to gain knowledge, why not? But probably the most important story of what Odin went through in order to gain knowledge is when he hanged himself on Yggdrasil, the world tree. It's pictured that this imagery is that he's riding Yggdrasil like a horse. What he did was he hanged himself with a spear stuck in his sides. And this is actually significant because it's believed that people may have been sacrificed to Odin hanging on a tree with a spear stuck in his sides. But what he did was that he sacrificed himself to himself, and for 9 nights, again that number 9, he hung there, and what he got in return was runes, and these runes gave him a series of spells and charms to work with, where he was able to do 18 magnificent songs or spells, 18 magical feats, such as, for example, he can blunt enemy weapons. He could, let's see, he could calm seas. He could bring down a man who's hanged and make him talk. He could seduce all women, and all these other spells that he was able to do with the use of these runes. Now, what are these runes? They're a series of characters that ancient Germans and Scandinavians used as a writing system before they adopted the Latin alphabet. There's different runic alphabets. The more accurate term is not alphabet, it's Futhark, but I'm not going to split hairs here. There's different runic alphabets that we have. We have a very old one, which has 24 characters. That's called the Elder Futhark. And but closer to the time of when this stuff was written down is the Younger Futhark that Scandinavians used from the 800s onwards. But that alphabet only has 16 characters, not quite 18. So what these 18 runes are a bit of a mystery, and of course the literature doesn't tell you exactly what runes he used and how he used them, but a lot of people, especially esoteric runologists, love to speculate as to how Odin used these runes, and today you can look up the runes, and people enjoy putting their name using the runic alphabet and so forth, or whatever runic alphabet they choose. There's the Elder Futhark, the Younger Futhark, there's the Anglo-Saxon Futhark. Anyway, but I'm getting a little off thing here. So, like I said, this story that talks about how Odin hanged on Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is the world tree, the world ash tree. It shows that Odin, in addition to being many things, a lover, a lord of hosts, a battle, he was a magician, a rather dark magician, and he was also the god of poetry, believe it or not. And there's a very great story about how he got. Well, what happened is that, in order to become a really good poet, it's believed that you had to drink this mead, called the poetic mead, or the Scaldic mead. Sometimes it's called Scaldic mead because Scaldic was a type of poetry. There were different types of poetry that people wrote in Scandinavia and Iceland, and one of them is Scaldic poetry, but there were other poetry as well. So what happens is that the story goes is that there was a very wise man named Kvasir, and he was murdered by a couple of dwarves who took his blood, mixed it with honey, and created this magnificent mead that whoever drank it would be a very wise poet. Well, making the story a little shorter, the mead wound up in the hand of a giant named Suttung, and he hid it in a mountain, and it was guarded by his beautiful daughter Gunnlod. And one day, Odin, in disguise, found out where this mead was hidden, and he wanted it. And with the help of another giant who was Suttung's brother, he drilled a hole in the mountain, but the hole was very thin. So Odin transformed himself, being the magician he was, he transformed himself into a snake, went through the hole, and being a lover of women, seduced Gunnlod to give him the meads by sleeping with her. And she only promised 3 sips from the 3 big vats that held the mead. But of course, with Odin, Odin's going to do what Odin wants. With each sip, he wound up sucking up every drop of the mead in his mouth, and then left the cave in the form of an eagle to fly back to Asgard with his mouth filled with mead. Well, the giant Suttung found out, got really angry, and he turned into an eagle too, because giants have magical abilities too, don't forget that. And he followed Odin, and he's gaining on Odin, and the people in Asgard, they realize that Odin's coming with something in his mouth, and they put up all these cups and vats, so just when Odin is coming, he spits out the mead, and it goes into all the cups and the vats and the dishes and everything, but a little bit trickles down to earth, and whoever drinks this trickle down portion is considered an inferior poet. But if you want to be a true poet, you have to be given the gift of mead by Odin himself in order to be a great wise poet. Now, I've spoken a lot about Odin and how Odin gets his way and how wise he is. And when I say wise, I don't mean necessarily nice. Just he knows a lot of things. And but you know what? Don't underestimate Odin's wife, because sooner or later everybody has to answer to his wife. Odin's wife was named Frigga, and we get Friday from her name, or Friggastad. She's sometimes it's said Freya is Friday, but I think the official term is Friday is Frigga's day. Now Frigga was she had her own abilities and she had her own knowledge, and she spun the clouds when she was bored. She would spin with a big wheel, and she would spin the clouds that you actually see. That's what she did. But she was a force to be reckoned with too. And when she wanted to get something out of Odin, she could do that. For example, in my other video where I talk about books on Norse mythology, I mentioned the Eddas. But there's another book that I didn't mention, which sometimes also talks about ancient Germanic myths. And that is a book called The History of the Langobards by Peter the... what's his name? Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Peter. Paul the Deacon. So Paul the Deacon wrote a book called History of the Langobards. Now, the Langobards are also called the Lombards, and they were Scandinavian people who came down from Scandinavia, and for a while they lived in Italy, and today we get Italy has a region called Lombardy, Lombardy, which is where the Lombards lived. But there's a story how the Lombards got their name. Lombard or Langobards mean Longbeards. And what happens is that one day the Langobards were about to fight their enemies, and Odin was going to give victory to the Langobards' enemies. Now, they prayed to Frigga, so Frigga promised that I'll find a way to make the Langobards win, because I want them to win. Now, they didn't have a name at this time. So what she did was she said to the Langobards, the people who will be called Langobards, she goes, get all your women, and when the sun rises, stand them all up, put all your women out in front of the rising sun, and take their hair and put it in front of their faces. So Odin goes to sleep the night before. He gets up, and she turns his bed to face the rising sun. And he looks out, and he sees all of these people with what look like long beards. And he said, who are these Longbeards or Langobards? Who are these Langobards? And his wife Frigga said, well, you just christened them. You just gave them, well, that's a Christian term. You just basically sort of blessed them by giving them a name, by calling them Langobards. Now, because you did that, you have to give them the victory. So Odin was sort of forced to agree with his wife and give the victory to the Langobards. So don't underestimate Frigga, even though Odin is a god not to be trifled with. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Odin. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll think of something else to talk about next time.